Hello, and welcome to Inside the Learning Experience, the podcast dedicated to exploring innovative ideas shaping education today. Our goal is to deliver direct insights into learning innovation to educators, designers, and instructional leaders, equipping them with the tools and knowledge to enhance their practices and foster greater educational impact. I'm your host, Omid Fotuhi, the Director of Learning Innovation here at WGU Labs. And today I'm excited to welcome back Lita, an expert on learning experience design and instructional strategy. Our conversation today will delve into the evolving role of instruction in education, particularly as artificial intelligence increasingly influences teaching methods, instructor roles, and student engagement. Welcome, Lita. Nice to have you back.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
Lita, I wonder if, as we did in the last conversation, could you also give the audience a brief introduction about yourself, your professional career, and how you ended up focusing on this domain of learning?
Sure. For the most part, my career is really centered in higher education on the faculty side. I spent about 25 years or so teaching online English at both proprietary, public, and private universities and colleges. And of course, as well as face to face. So I was also doing the brick and mortar face to face classroom as well. And eventually, the online course experience, both teaching and creating courses, became more interesting than the face to face. That obviously came with the emergence of new technologies. But I decided to move more into course design and a little bit further away from teaching. I really enjoyed leveraging technology so much so that I began to help my colleagues with their online courses and also using technology for a complement or a supplement to their face to face courses. And eventually, I'd left the classroom officially full time and went into online course design, instructional design, learning experience design, curriculum design, and management, and made my way eventually to WGU and then to WGU Labs, where I am today.
That's great. And it's great to have you at Labs where we can really leverage your insights and experiences in this domain. You mentioned how you've consistently been pulled by thinking about the scaling of instruction and the scaling of educational impact and the role that technology can play. We're at a pretty interesting time in history where technology has taken a gigantic leap forward. I was doing an interview the other day, and the analogy of the invention of fire was the best one that I could come up with when I was thinking about what AI represents in our current landscape. Because before fire, there was probably a very consistent pace of innovation, but then people discovered fire, and then that led to the invention and the creation of so many other capabilities that we never even knew existed. And that is the scale of intensity that I feel AI is at. It's the closest analogy I can think of. So as you've been thinking about this history of technology with the delivery of curriculum instruction through online channels, how do you reflect on the potentially significantly larger step that AI can play in accelerating and enhancing scale of instruction?
That's a great question. Again, looking at it from that instructor or faculty lens, which is always helpful to me because even though we always center the student in anything that we create, the way we come at a project, our background, our lens is going to just enhance that even more. So I'm always thoughtful about my instructor or faculty background. When I think about this quick expansion, this rapid expansion of AI and other technologies and how they're impacting education, I think one that we in higher education, we're being forced to rethink how we deliver learning experiences. Gone are the days of simply the sage on the stage, right? No one wants to go and hear a person just talk to them for 50 minutes without asking questions, without engaging us as students and learners. Gone are those days. We all can agree with that. But the way this technology is advancing, it also causes us to rethink what's important when we design for learning. How are we going to have the most effective and efficient impact on students and learners? And what do we need to know, not just about ourselves as the designers, our subject matter experts, the curriculum, but our learners themselves? Are they ready for this impact? So we can create, we can have fun, we can do all these things behind closed doors and create amazing products and projects. But if we're not inviting those learners and their experiences and their needs and their pain points to the table, then it's for nothing. So yes, I'm excited about how fast things are going. I recognize that we are very vulnerable right now. We in this maker space, if you will, because we don't know what we don't know. That's what's so amazing about AI. This generative AI whirlwind that we're in right now, we could not have conceived of this, years ago. And now here we are in it, which means that we are going towards something that we don't know as well. So I like to think of it like as a continuum, and where we are is just a little blip on that continuum. But what we do with what we have right now will have a major impact 10, 20, 30 years from now with folks who are on the next, part of that continuum. And that's exciting. That's our contribution. It's okay to not know what we're doing, but to continue to move forward because we are impacting the future.
What you raise is a feeling of excitement. And excitement is interesting because if you unpack it, you can be adaptively and positively excited. You're looking forward to something. You can also be nervously excited, just to say that your body is anxious about what could happen because this is a big deal. And I feel like we're in that moment where kind of you're feeling both at the same time. And I think that the reason for that is because we don't know what's going to happen. We know that there's a disruptive force on the scene. We know that it has a lot of promise, but there's also potentially a lot of peril. And I want to ask you, as you've been doing this design work, I know you've been thinking about this from a conceptual, theoretical perspective. How do you know, incrementally, step by step, whether or not the convergence of preference and benefit actually come together for students who are the ultimate clients of all of this? And some of the work you've been doing on the four dimensions, would love to hear more about that. But I think that's kind of how people are wondering, how do we take that next step forward, is understanding the frameworks that give us clarity about the relative ratio of positive versus negative outcomes, and would love to hear more about that work.
I love that question. How do I know? Sometimes we don't know. Like sometimes we're just moving forward just to see what happens. And that's again going back to the idea of being vulnerable and accepting that we are in a space that we've never been in before. And the only way we're going to make sense of this is to make mistakes, is to be very bold in our decisions. And that's what one of the things I love about labs and working with you actually as well, because you're very pro, taking a chance, taking those risks, fail, what is it, fail quickly and move on. And we have to be willing to do that. But to your question though, a lot of it is looking at the research. Like my background is literary analysis, but I also love research in terms of what's been done before and what other researchers have found, their studies and so forth. So literature review, that's my jam, if you will. I love to look at what others have done, what they found, and make sense of that for what I'm looking for. So I've been kind of buried in studies and looking at the questions that were asked to see if anyone's asking the questions that I have. And that's exciting because I want to contribute to that literature, that research. But again, we may not know for sure. But what we do is we take what we already know, we make sense of that within the context of what we're trying to decide and find out. And we borrow from one another. There are lots of projects going on, as you know, right now at labs. And it's really cool to talk to colleagues and say, what have you found out? And they may not think it has anything to do with my project, which is on instruction, but it actually does. So, what did you learn about students, for example, when it comes to their perceptions of AI? That question can go across all of the strands, all of the projects, right? How do we know, for example, how demographic information plays a part in students' perceptions and willingness and interest in us folding in AI into the curriculum, or in my case, into the instructional practices? So those are the things that I think about, like just simply being open, taking that next step, sometimes without knowing, where the line is, and just seeing what happens. And so what we're doing in terms of the four dimensions, you mentioned that, it's really a way for us to consider. We're validating this framework, so we're not quite there yet, but it's a cool way to consider when we ask the question of how can we, or what can be done to improve a student's learning experience in terms of instructional support. So this is not, and I want to make this very clear, this is not replacing the faculty with AI. I want to really emphasize that this is not that at all. But it's leveraging AI and other technologies to help enhance instructional support for students and for faculty so that they can do other things and be ready for that human intervention when needed. And the four dimensions kind of helps us figure that out. And that's what we're doing right now, looking at those four concepts and how kind of the overlay or the overlap of them at any given time in a student's educational or academic journey within the course, how they converge and what we can do with the technology at those convergence points.
I think that's really exciting work. And as you know, some of our previous research with the College Innovation Network, one of the findings that resurfaced, which I was surprised by and continue to think about, is when we asked students what their preferred modality was for learning, whether it was online or in person, we found that first gen students tended to report a greater preference for more distance learning. So they tended to prefer more online versions of learning than their counterparts. And at the same time, we also asked our participants which modality they thought would be most effective and which one would help them feel more supported and more integrated and a greater sense of belonging. And we found the opposite effect. That those same groups actually reported perceiving that there would be greater benefit from the same modalities that they just also said they would prefer less. So, which is the more sort of integrated, hands on, personal, individual. And I think that's where the four dimensions is really interesting because just like your children, they'll always say, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. They go. And they're like, oh, that was actually great. And where I think we're at right now is because there's so much that we don't know about AI that there could be this distinction between what people say they prefer and what they actually benefit from. And I think generally the research shows that when navigating uncertainty, those who feel most uncertain are the most likely to distance themselves. So you can imagine that there's an equity component to all of this. If you have less access to these tools, less cultural norms that introduce you to these tools, then you might be disposed to say, I don't want to try these tools. But at the same time, you might be the group that could benefit the most from these same tools. And I think that's where the four dimensions framework is really interesting because you're doing this juxtaposition between the components of engagement between AI and humans, both from a preference perspective and a potential benefit perspective, as you're looking at students and faculty. Can you share a little bit more about the methods? Because I'd love to nerd out, and the methods actually is really exciting to surface the real theory that you're trying to uncover here.
Yeah, one of the things that I've centered my learning experience design approach on is really this model of the community of inquiry practice. And the COI is really based on this idea that there are three major components to the ideal learning experience. And that's whether we're in a classroom or wherever it is, right? It could be online, it could be face to face, but those 3 components are the cognitive presence, the social presence, and then the teaching or teacher presence or instructor presence. And if you think about those 3 and you have that Venn diagram, that middle part is that sweet spot, right? Where all of those things are not necessarily equal, but they're showing up throughout the engagement. You really are optimizing for good learning, good solid learning experience. What we're doing is we're looking specifically at the teaching presence or the instructor presence within a learning experience and how that very unique and very nuanced ability of faculty to move students from A to B, whether it's in one course or over a period of that course or even a class session. How do they do that in a way that is exciting, is challenging enough to get students engaged in thinking, and especially thinking critically, and hopefully to that higher level of Bloom's taxonomy where they're actually, really thinking critically and creating and so forth. So, how do they do that? And that's important because what we're not trying to do is simply transfer knowledge, right? So, when we think about AI and instructor chat bots and all that, we're really dealing with an agent more than a bot because we're doing more than just transferring knowledge. So, if a student is in a course and they have a problem with some concept, let's say they don't understand an idea or a concept that they've come across, even though the content is there in the course, they need a little bit more. The agent could come up on the, lower right corner or to the right, which is usually where these bots come up, and could say, "Do you need some help?" And the student could just then interact with the bot. And that's not new. That's not revolutionary. We've seen that. We've seen that, in fact, outside of higher education. These students are very used to seeing that when they do online shopping or they pay their utility bill, right? Something's going to pop up on that website to see if they need help. That's easy. And there's definitely a need for that. But those bots are limited in what they can help the student do and also in their engagement. We're trying to go beyond that. We're trying to replicate that instructor presence from the community of inquiry. And so what we're asking ourselves in order to do that, to create this much more sophisticated agent, is what do we know about what students need when they ask for instructional support? When they just even try to ask for instructional support, because to your point earlier, they may not even know what they need, right? They may have preferences versus needs. And how do we then capture that and train this agent to do that sort of work, again, in support of that human intervention, that actual faculty member who may not be present? If this is an asynchronous course, for example, and this is happening, the student can't necessarily just stop and say, I'm going to call my professor and find out. That's not going to happen, right? They can put in a request to have a meeting, but it may not be for another 24 hours. So we're talking about just in time support in the learning experience. We're talking about a much more sophisticated, robust exchange, and we're talking about going beyond transfer of knowledge. We're talking about actual learning in these interactions. That's very ambitious, which is why it's so exciting. So the four dimensions is a way for us, and again, we're looking at whether we're validating this idea. It's a way for us to get closer to that. And the four dimensions include stakes, urgency, complexity, and stigma. And we're saying that those four things, not exclusive, there are other things that are also important, but those four seem to be, from what we found in the research, the top four, if you will, or some of the most important factors when it comes to a student engaging in some type of request for support. So, really quickly, I'll go over those four, but the idea being that the agent would understand through questions and interaction with the student, as well as patterns of their participation or activity in the course up to this point. That's something else, because now we're getting into personalized learning. But the agent would be able to use those four dimensions in order to satisfy the need of the student in that moment, but also move them along in the learning of that concept or skill. So stakes, what's at stake basically? If I'm in a course and I am saying that I'm preparing for a major assessment, maybe a summative assessment, and so I'm asking a question that's going to be a part of that, or I have a major assignment coming up, and so the stakes are high. The agent would then understand, from understanding what the student's response is, that this is high stakes, medium stakes, or low stakes, right? When it comes to urgency, this is again about timing, but this is that assignment is due tomorrow. That's very different than I'm just getting ready, getting teed up to work on something that's due in 3 weeks. And stakes may be, this is my third attempt at an assessment. Urgency may be that I don't have a lot of time. I'm a working adult, right? I have a job, I have children, and this is an urgent request versus I could come back to this next week or tomorrow. Another of the four dimensions is complexity. The question that you're asking me, this is what the agent is thinking, the AI agent, is low complexity. This is just a definition. Or this is a multi-layered process. It's going to take a little bit more than just simply, a couple of sentences here and there. I need to walk the student through major processes or steps. So there's again high, medium, and low when it comes to complexity. And then the last one is stigma. And this is really interesting because the research shows that students they know what feels good to them. They understand their preferences, but they sometimes don't know how to express that. So we're getting kind of into social emotional learning and intelligence. So asking for help to a human or to the AI agent can be really, really uncomfortable for some students. So that would be kind of like a high level, like this is, I feel I should know this already kind of moment versus someone else who's like, this is something that's going to help me. So I'm going to use this to my advantage. And then of course, medium is somewhere in the middle. So when you think about those four dimensions and how they impact that experience in that moment for the student, as well as some other things, we're layering in Socratic method, we're layering in other learning science content and data. This is going to be an amazing experience for students, and hopefully it will increase engagement. Hopefully it will lower anxiety, and hopefully it will get them through that learning experience, that course, so that we can have stronger persistence rates and of course ultimately stronger graduation rates.
I'm kind of blown away at the way you've been able to get us out of the mindset of like, is this good or bad? It's actually closer to like something like pineapple on pizza. It's complicated, it's
Yeah.
personal. There's a lot of dimensions to it that you all seem to be thinking about in a very thoughtful, intentional way because there's so much nuance and so much of it depends. At this point, I can't help but try to shift our focus on the instructors. So here we are talking about the technologies that can support students in the instruction. But from an instructor perspective, when it comes down to the core of what they are tasked to do, how would you define or describe what an instructor is most vital for being able to do?
Right. So as we think about that agent and that interaction with the agent and the student, as I just described, there will inevitably be moments where the instructor agent will escalate so that the student knows through the interaction with the agent that the agent is kind of escalating them up to a human intervention. And that's where that faculty member comes in. Again, this is not at all to replace faculty. It's in fact a better way of streamlining so that faculty can address concerns, issues, that's clarifying concepts and skills, et cetera, for students that is much more directed and focused versus students who may have something that could be easily addressed through an interaction with an agent. It kind of frees up faculty time, but also allows them to kind of elaborate on more deeper understanding of certain concepts and skills, which is really where we want our faculty to spend the majority of their efforts. The other thing about this is that faculty can give, of course, human intervention is going to give much more of part of that social and that cognitive presence I talked about with the community of inquiry. They're going to be able to really tap into that and elevate that, where the agent is obviously not going to be able to do that. So yeah, we definitely want to make sure we know where in this kind of feedback loop and where in this interaction with the agent that the human intervention is absolutely needed. And this is a supplement to that. It's not just for the student, it's a supplement to the faculty as well. The faculty could then, this is my ideal state, the faculty would be able to see the transcripts or at least have a kind of high level summary so that they could then kind of take it from there, like passing the baton, but also looking at data analytics to see where students have asked for help throughout their journey in the course, how many times they've revisited a certain section, how they've done on, formative assessments and activities. Those patterns are going to give us so much in terms of like predictive analytics to be able to say, this looks like someone who's probably going to need some intervention. Let me go ahead and touch base with them before they even reach out to me. That is where we're going to see much more bang for our buck when it comes to course design.
Because the reality is that faculty are tasked with a lot of logistical components of their work, taking attendance, creating a syllabus, making sure that students have access to the platforms, creating standardized assessments, grading, which if you asked, I bet, any faculty about how relatively excited they are about those components, it would fall lower than the parts that you mentioned, which is the mentorship, the coaching, the guidance, which really is at the heart of why we can benefit from an interaction where learning can be exchanged on a mutual basis. In some of our work, we've sort of framed this as the belonging efficiency dilemma. And I think that notion that it's all along a singular spectrum can actually be misleading. And the reason for that is, I think, what we know and what you've shared is that learning happens best when someone is able to recognize where you are and then triage the relevant support for you at the right time in the right place so that you can continue your learning. And what's really powerful about that, I think, which sometimes we take for granted, is the recognition that instructors are not the ones accountable for the learning. They're there to create the conditions where students can learn for themselves. And I think we forget that sometimes, that we say that the onus of the learning is solely on the instructors, but that's actually not the case. And if we realize all of the components that don't feed into the learning experience, then you can imagine a world in which these tools can complement the role that the instructors actually have, which is to troubleshoot, to coach, to mentor, to encourage in times of need. I'll ask one more questions about instructors. As you're thinking about that ideal state of instruction, and for those of us who are instructors or learning designers, how do you see the set of skills or tools that they should be thinking about upskilling with to better be able to deliver on the work that they are essentially tasked to do?
It's easy to say that we can give, the students all these things that they need to come in with. At least a level of proficiency in digital literacy, for example. I mean, if you're taking online courses, certainly we expect you to have some level of digital literacy. But I would say that as well for faculty. We started this conversation when I talked about this kind of old way of looking at education and higher education and learning, and that we've moved away from those old concepts. But there are still faculty who still cling to kind of old ways of teaching that they may not even be aware of, that they're coming through or manifesting in the way that they interact with students or their expectations. This is, again, an overwhelming time where so much is being thrown at faculty. And when I say faculty and I'm talking about higher ed, I would also include K-12 teachers as well, where they have this kind of there's an expectation that they have to quickly learn in order to keep up with things while doing all of the other things, their research and things that they're interested in. So I would say that being mindful of, it's okay to not know everything. It's okay. These are high level, high performing people as faculty, and they know of their subject very well. So they're not used to not knowing or being inept at something. But at this time, I would say it's okay, as long as you're open to taking on, that quick little, micro course on digital literacy or AI instruction and so forth. Take that time for professional development and get to know these new tools, and um, think of it from a metacognitive experience as well. And kind of role model for your students. We talk a lot about student agency and self-efficacy. Those are things that faculty have to do as well. They are owners of their own professional development as well. So making those decisions and knowing that they can be successful in terms of self-efficacy, that's all a part of this as well, and reaching out to, whatever institution they're at, but also on their own. There's so much now that you can do. There's so many free courses, there's so many resources to just simply learn a little bit about AI and its impact on education and learning and teaching, just one step at a time. I think it'll be well worth it for them.
Yeah, I think my previous mentor, Dr. Carol Dweck, would be proud of your answer, which is to say
Absolutely.
there's no specific strategy that is the right answer, which also means that you can't really do wrong as long as you're embodying this mindset of growth and learning. I think that's right, because we don't know what the next wave of technology or tools will bring, but the situation in which you avoid engaging and experimenting means you'll never discover the ones that work for you. I love that. I'm going to ask you just maybe, and as we start to close down, as you think about the work that you've been doing, some of the projects you've been involved with really are at the cutting edge of this discovery of what do students expect, what do they benefit from. You work with instructors, you've got your hands on some of the most pioneering, cutting edge tools. What recommendations or advice would you have for learning designers and institutional leaders as they're thinking about how to invest in the programs, the tools, the resources for being able to meet the students' evolving needs?
Well, again, it's an overwhelming time, and there's this kind of fast-paced feeling when you're in this world. So my advice would be to step back, take a look at things. Don't feel so rushed to get to the next thing before everyone else. Everyone's doing something. You're reading about it, you're listening to podcasts, you're seeing, this university just launched this or whatever. It's okay. But I think if we rush what we're doing in terms of innovative solutions, we'll miss so many learning opportunities. So I would say don't be in such a rush to get something to market because everyone, your competitors or everyone else is. You want to get something to market that's really going to move the needle, that's really going to have impact. And that takes some time. However, I would also say fail fast. You know, do the work, dedicate teams or groups or new employees, whatever it takes to work on these questions and these solutions so that there's a concentration of it so that it is part of the institution or the organization that you represent. Don't just rely on we'll see, right? So I would say move forward, but don't be in such a rush that you miss some critical components to, product and project management and innovation. The other thing I would say is document the journey along the way. It's going to be helpful so that when we do those retrospectives, when we look back and say, what did we miss or what did we not do? What did we overlook? We'll have that documentation. So I would say document not only what we did in terms of steps and projects, but also what we were learning along the way. That qualitative data is going to be really, really important. A year from now, when we take whatever product we design to the next level, right? The next iteration. It's not just how it performed, it's also looking back at what we thought at the time when we were creating it in the first place. So I think that's really helpful.
I said that would be closing up, but I can't help but ask one more question. This is more of an imagination kind of thing. As you think about the learning experience in 10 years from now, do you feel comfortable sharing a glimpse into what you can see as being a scene of sort of the future state of learning?
Hmm, that's a really big question, Omid. Well, gosh, 10 years from now. I mean, will we even be here on this planet? I don't know. I think we're going to take a lot of things that we think are kind of wow moments right now for granted, for sure. I think that, and I hope with all of my heart that marginalized communities will be much more in the fold, will be able to access these amazing products and this new technology without, gatekeepers. I think that education will move toward, and again, this is being very idealistic and hopeful, but it'll move toward being more democratized and that more people will have access to it and that it won't be as expensive. It will be the great equalizer that it's supposed to be because this technology is going to move it in that direction. I love the fact that ChatGPT came out and it was free. That's huge, right? That's a huge thing because it is revolutionizing so many industries, but it's free, which means we have access. So, I don't know, a scene I see also that what we think of as higher education will have much more of a blending into what we think of as corporate or, there won't be as harsh of a divide between higher ed learning and corporate learning and development. That learning will be learning. That learning, kind of like what we saw with YouTube University, right? I mean, it changed the game, right? We can learn pretty much anything we need to learn on YouTube. No one saw that coming. So yeah, I think those walls, those divides that we see now will definitely be dissolved. Now, what replaces it? I have to be idealistic and hope that it's going to be some wonderful content and systems that are disruptive still, but are not divisive.
I love that vision of a world in which learning is accessible by all and at all ages as you're going through life, not as a separate section of life, restricted by barriers and boundaries. It's a beautiful image.
Absolutely.
Well, Lita, I want to thank you again for joining us, taking the time, and being so generous with your insights and knowledge. I want to thank you all who are listening to us for joining us on Inside the Learning Experience. We hope that today's discussion empowers you to integrate AI thoughtfully into your instruction strategies. Be sure to subscribe and join us next time as we continue exploring groundbreaking ideas transforming the learning landscape. Thank you.